Hello and welcome to Expected Own Goals. Week 7, Big Numbers Drop Edition, Part 2.
It's week 8.
Oh, they're right. You know what? Reddit's right. We get all the numbers wrong.
This all stays in.
Hello and welcome to Expected Own Goals, Week 8, Part 2. I'm your host, Eric Morgan.
I'm Evan Davis. Kieran is here, just like he was in Part 1. This is Part 2 of our Week 8. The data is starting to stabilize vibe check edition of how things are going in the NWSL. We hit a bunch of teams earlier this week where we were incorrect about from a range of sort of to egregiously. So today we are going to try and unpack first a couple of teams who we feel like the table isn't really reflecting necessarily how well they're doing to varying extents. And then we're going to highlight some players who we feel have really surprised us in cool and exciting ways, and players who have really disappointed us relative to preseason expectations. So, first and foremost, let's chat about the luckiest team of the season so far, at least based on the XG differential model from American Soccer Analysis, and that's the Chicago Red Stars, who we went deep on with Leslie Ryder of Football is Wife last week. So if you're looking for a much, much deeper and much more thorough, fully contextualized, wink, wink, conversation about Chicago, you can find it there. We'll keep it a little bit high level today, but tied for fourth on points right now with Portland. Their regular goal differential per game is sitting in 6th in the league, but by non-penalty XG differential per game, they are negative 0.1 and 9th in the league. Eric, I'll start with you. Has this team been lucky this year?
The Lorne effect is real. And yes, they have been lucky. The numbers obviously bear out that they've been lucky, but I also think that they have played a style and used an approach that has put points on the board, and that amount of luck that they've already recorded so far might be good enough to help carry them into the playoffs.
Kieran?
One of the interesting things about them is that, they're one of those teams who their non-penalty numbers diverge significantly from their penalty numbers because they're at +2 penalty differential so far. One of the other teams is Utah are getting hammered in their penalty numbers because they've conceded 5 penalties and haven't gotten one. And they've also been quite lucky or unlucky with own goals. So it's kind of a weird one where you actually really do have to strip a lot of that stuff out, because otherwise they look like a reasonably fine, or they look reasonably better than they actually are. Their Lorne Donaldson's been organized, and they have a reasonably high floor for a team they're not amazing, but he's at least built a platform for Mel Swanson to go win games off of, which is nice.
Yeah, I mean, an attacking strategy that involves Sam Staub pinging it over the top to Mel Swanson, you could do worse. And if you combine that with incredibly well-organized defensive structure, then you can win a lot of 1-0s, 2-1s, especially if things just kind of break your way. And as Eric said, you get enough points in the bank with 8 playoff spots. This team is probably, at this point, going to get in unless things really take a turn. The thing that I'm impressed with is that Lorne Donaldson's strategy is entirely based around making the most of the chances that you do get, because you're not going to get many of them. And just by XG per shot, they're number 1 in the league. Little over 0.12 XG per shot that they are making. They don't get a lot of shots, don't get a lot of chances, but the ones that they are making are incredibly high value. It gives you a floor that's actually a little bit higher than you would think for a team where they're not necessarily impressing in other areas in attack.
This is off the dome, so if it's wrong, it's not my fault. I think Jamaica were very similar in terms of their XG profiles, that they were a low quantity, high quality team.
Their defense was much worse than what Chicago's is, but that just comes down to the fact Donaldson has better players to work with the Red Stars than he does with Jamaica, with all respect to Denisha Blackwood and Rebecca Spencer. And so if we think that maybe they're a little bit less lucky than the overall goal difference XG split suggests, Eric, do you think they can sustain this?
It's funny. I went back and listened to our Chicago preview. What the ceiling on this season was probably a low playoff spot. I think that they might exceed that. So in some ways, this is a tremendous transformation from the team that they were last season. Not only do I think, having watched a fair number of their games, they are hitting teams and creating good chances, and I think this team's like pretty for real. Let's say they go through a run that's almost as unlucky as they've been lucky. I still don't think that puts them outside the playoff spots just yet. I think it puts them cuspy, but that again is a massive improvement from decidedly the worst team in the league last year.
They're definitely realer than last year. I kind of am inclined to say something like your original point, Evan, that like they might just have enough points on the board at this point that as they regress to their numbers, they'll be a low-end playoff team is probably my expectation from here.
Yeah, I think that's fair. When you can maximize the opportunities that come to you as they have been doing, you can skate through, as it were. But if anything happens to Mel Swanson, then you do get a little bit nervous if Penelope Hawking and Ali Schlegel can step up.
And frankly, if anything happens to Sam Staub, who I know never misses a minute ever, but if anything happens there, that's actually a significant amount of their offense that they would lose.
Yeah, to say nothing of like how they'd be able to handle themselves defensively, because moving Tatum Milazzo back into central defense is probably not going to be. It's not going to be super great. And ironically, if Alyssa Nair ends up out long term, that could also play a really big part for his whatever we've said about Alyssa Nair over the last several months. Like, she's had a pretty good year this year, barring some calamitous gaffes, but like in the main, at least as a shot stopper, like she's looked sharp, and they have not done a great job of planning for the future behind her. Sydney Schneider is the next player up and has not gotten a lot of reps at this level. So is she going to let a few goals slip by that maybe wouldn't have slipped by earlier in the season? I wonder.
Yeah, I've been quite surprised with the Nair-assance, as it were.
From Nair to Nair-assance. Okay, now the unluckiest team we will offer simply as a measurement of the gap between their raw goal difference and their XG difference. What we are not saying about them is that they are actually good, and that is the Seattle Reign, who are currently sporting a negative 0.9 non-penalty goal differential, which is tied for 13th with Houston at the bottom of the table. They're 12th on points per game, but their non-penalty XG differential, negative 0.3, and that puts them in a whopping 11th place. So they're not exactly moving a lot of spaces up on the table based on underlying performances. I wrote about their attack in Backheel this week. I feel sad about the Reign in this funny way. A lot of what is happening is partially self-inflicted, but also not, just due to the circumstances of the sale of the team that still hasn't closed. And they were not able to attract talent toward them in the offseason, barring Jess Fishlock's friends on the Wales national team, and Ji So-yeon. Ji So-yeon has not had a strong season. She's looked sharp at times, but not in the aggregate. Bethany Balser has been continually left on an island at the top of the formation without any apparent ability by the midfield to connect with her. On a per-shot level, I think they're at the bottom of the league with Houston and Utah in terms of the quality of the chances they're making per shot. And the defense isn't as strong as it was last year. So Laura Harvey's entire tactical approach getting to the NWSL Championship in 2023 is not getting them extra points when the attack isn't clicking. Eric, how unlucky has this team really been?
I mean, I think they are as unlucky as the numbers suggest they are, which is to say reasonably unlucky, but also they're a deeply flawed side. They don't have potency in attack. I just wonder when they go down a goal, where the goal is coming from. And that was a question that we had at the beginning of the season. They seem just tremendously anemic. And without some sort of summer reinforcement, I think we're looking at like arguably the worst season in Reign history.
I think undoubtedly in terms of the first 10 games or first 9 games, like that's fairly true in terms of where they're projecting. I think the most interesting thing about them tactically that really shows up in the numbers is that historically, the defense and the offense are tied, right? When the press is good, they do not concede many high quality chances, and they are getting good transition juice out of what they win from the press. This is particularly pertinent right now because I remember an article from our friend Arvind, who obviously is missing right now. So if you live in the VA area, keep your eyes peeled. But wrote this amazing piece about Seattle's press and how they use their press to limit chances, but also to generate stuff the other way. And I think what we're seeing this year is like that press is just not there. Like the Reign are bottom 5 for attacking third turnovers generated. That cannot happen if you're a team who's using the press as a playmaker.
Some of it is the age curve catching up. They are an older team. Some of it is the approach Laura Harvey is taking. But you look at like their performance against Kansas City, they generated absolutely nothing. They had their most ambitious sort of outing against Portland. And I think in that game, they were truly unlucky. But they still didn't even create a full XG. And then they got drilled 4-0. Again, Portland got lucky on some of that. But short of a Shelby Hogan error that creates the best chance of the game, they really relied on like an error on a free kick to create their best opportunity. I see them creating so little from open play, and I just don't have good answers short of like roster additions.
Yeah, Seattle just doesn't seem like they have a lot of faith in themselves to be able to create chances. Like Laura Harvey, when the going ever got tough since she returned, was to tell Sofia Huerta to bomb up the right flank and ping a cross into the box. Well, Huerta's completed crosses into the box this season have vanished. They've completely collapsed. When she used to be one of the best in the entire league. Now she's not generating basically any crosses into the box per game. And so without a tricky winger like Megan Rapinoe, without Rose Lavelle, without any other areas where they could find creation or incision, Plan C isn't even working. And that, I think, is quite shocking, honestly. Like, I think Huerta has played deeper as a right back this season than she ever has in a Reign uniform, which is I don't know what to make of that. I don't know how Harvey can feel so almost scared to let the team open up earlier in matches when they can potentially chase a winning goal. It's not like they lack talent, even if it's not necessarily top tier talent. You know, Balser is still quite good when you use Balser correctly. You know, Jordan Huitema is a good, hold up number 9 if you use her correctly and don't over rely on her to do everything in the center forward position. Ji So-yeon, if you allow her runners that she can actually pass to, so she doesn't have to stall out on the ball and, eventually pass sideways or pass backward, like, could still be effective. We've seen it in flashes at times this season. So I don't get it. I don't get why Harvey feels so oddly afraid. Am I overreacting there?
I don't know. Like, what I will say, I'll just tack on to your Sofia Huerta point before I let Eric take a crack at whether they're afraid. Huerta's second bottom in the entire league for a G+ above average right now. And it's almost all in lost passing value. Like, she's adding negative value to her team as a passer when historically she has been perhaps the most plus value passer in the league. It's usually like her and Sam Staub are kind of the top ones. And if you look at kind of breaking down the passing chunks of what she's actually doing, she's attempting the same number of passes she does every year. She's completing roughly the same number of passes she does every year. But the breakdown of those passes into short, medium, long, into the box, into the final third, progressive, crosses, whatever, has all skewed towards short and medium passes of very dubious impact to your team. So whether that's she's not getting high enough in possession to actually attempt lots of crosses, whether that's she's just not completing on them, like her long ball completion percentage is much lower than it has been in past years, and her short pass completion percentage is much higher, which says to me that she's probably lower. Like, we are seeing that in the data as well. when you build a lot of your attacking ideas around a fullback, it's not the most difficult faucet to turn off for opposition teams.
I solidly agree with that. I take a look at, they have not generated 2xG in a game this year. That speaks to a level of conservatism, and I'm including penalties in that. You would sort of expect through 9 games that you would have seen at least one game where they would have somehow, even including a penalty, have generated 2xG. They have not. They have, I think in non-penalty XG, more than half of their games, they've not created 1xG. That speaks to just like a lack of adventure or chance creation. And, is it Huerta's fault for not connecting passes as much as it is there's nobody there to connect them? Do I think that Sofia Huerta has diminished as a passer, a long-range passer? I don't. I just think that like there's nobody there to connect because nobody's taking those runs, because nobody's making those chances. It's super concerning. I kind of want to, like when we talk about the rain, probably in a couple of weeks, I'll dig deeper into this. But I really think there is an interesting conversation to be had about like everything that is going wrong, because it's hard to pick just one thing.
And it isn't new. Like these problems started last year. So I think the easy answer would be to say, well, the drop from Lavelle and Quinn and Emily Sonnet, Quinn's been hurt for a couple of games now, to Anghara, James Turner, and Ji So-yeon, that just explains everything. Well, no, it doesn't, because last year they had the same midfield connectivity issues. They had the same chance creation issues. They just had Rapinoe and Huerta there to bail them out when they needed it, and Lavelle for, 3 games in the regular season or whatever. So, the underpinnings of these issues were beginning to flower. It's just now they don't have mega elite difference makers like Lavelle and Rapinoe to cover up those wounds. So you can't play like you want to play given the personnel that you have available to you, Laura Harvey. Like you have to reimagine this group some way and somehow, and not be so convinced that you're going to get run over every time you step out onto the field. The Kansas City result I kind of understand, just because Chewinga is Chewinga, and you have to do something to swallow up that attacking weapon. But that's also not the only data point, as Eric has pointed out, where these things keep cropping up. So while they probably should have scored maybe some more goals than they have, they probably should have conceded fewer goals than they have. They're still in really rough shape. And I don't know if this summer transfer window is going to fix that, because it's the middle of May and the sale of the team still hasn't closed yet. Like, that's bananas.
I'm going to ask a couple hypotheticals here. If you had the opportunity to take over either of these two teams today with the goal of getting into the playoffs, who would you prefer to take over as a team?
Oh, Chicago with a bullet.
Yeah, I think Chicago have many fewer like turnarounds that they need to make. Like they and the players that they perhaps want to move on from are like much lower wages, much lower cultural impact to their team. Like Jess Fishlock is, like, the nice way to say it is she has declined significantly.
Mm.
Like you're getting basically nothing from Jess Fishlock at this point. But that's also like a huge character in the history of your club. Like that's a difficult transition for every club to go through. Whereas Chicago, it's like you have Swanson and you can basically do whatever you want around that.
Yeah, and I think also like there's just so much more organizational stability now at Chicago, thanks to Laura Ricketts.
Isn't that a crazy thing to say?
Yeah, for real, given the last few years. But Laura Ricketts has given the team a foundation on which to build, and there still isn't that foundation in Seattle. So that is what would make me nervous about taking the Seattle Reign over.
What if I were to say, forget the table right now, or let's put both teams on, say, 11 points, so last playoff spot. Would that still hold for you, that you would prefer to try to guide Chicago into the playoffs on 11 points, or Seattle into the playoffs on 11 points currently?
I think so, because to kind of build off of what Kieran was saying, there's just more flexibility there. Like, to return to the summer transfer window, Chicago has more money and more players that can easily be replaced than Seattle does. Like Anghara, James Turner, and Ji So-yeon, they're probably not on big money, but they're on their contract structure, I'm quite sure, is of a kind that is going to make it hard to get that off of your books. Also, because I don't know who would want to take them. So I there's just like, if you need to move on from Taylor Mollum, I know Leslie really gassed her up when she was on last week, but like, if you need to move on from a player like that, that's a much easier solve than it is for Seattle.
If I don't get transfers and I'm like just stuck with the two rosters they have, I think I might lean ever so slightly Seattle, but it's pretty much a coin toss. Like, there's enough experience and talent there that like I think you can come up with some alternative ways to play that aren't so conservative, that there's some low hanging fruit for you there. But it's not. I don't feel as strongly either way. I don't think.
That's quite gloomy across the board. I actually worry for no, I mean, just, but that's the hard thing, like there are just sometimes not optimistic takes to be had about teams' performances. And it's not, the surprise of surprises, we're talking about the worst team historically in a very long time, and also a team that made the finals last year. And right now we're slightly favoring the team that was the worst historical team in a long time, less than a calendar year ago.
That's the NWSL, baby. Things change quickly.
That is sort of the beauty of the league, but also it's kind of shocking. I just didn't expect us to be. It's not that I thought Seattle was going to be particularly good. I just didn't think they would be this flawed this quickly, and that's been surprising, even if they've been unlucky.
I mean, you and I both had picked them as like a low playoff team. And
yeah,
that's very difficult to visualize now.
It turns out I lacked imagination. I just couldn't imagine an NWSL season without Seattle in the playoffs.
All right, guys, let's turn these frowns upside down here, and we're gonna move on to players who have delighted and disappointed these first 9 games. But we're gonna start with the ones who have been the biggest surprises for us, the ones who either through change in position or improvement in their peripheral statistics or change in team, different environment, or transfer into the league that we didn't necessarily know was going to work out, have just really exploded. None of us picked Barbara Banda because I think that's just unfair. Because I think that would just be everybody's answer. So
I also don't think like we're that shocked that she's amazing.
No,
like if I think there were wide error bars on our guesses, but I think if the center of those error bars would have been pretty high.
Maybe I'll segue into my sort of most delightful breakout player. I think the difference between Barbara Banda and who I think for me has been the shining light, Temwa Chawinga, was just we had international footage of Barbara Banda decimating opposition. And like we'd seen it, she had 2 hat tricks,
back-to-back hat tricks in the 2021 Olympics.
Yeah, devastating. And like we'd seen it even in a flash that Barbara Banda had a lot of really high quality aspects to her game. Temwa Chawinga, between playing in China and playing for Malawi, who don't have the pedigree of Zambia, there were just so many question marks, other than like everyone heard she's very fast. And in this league, speed really does matter, but speed without finishing, without movement, without the ability to play the ball, without dribbling, speed is one of those skills that like you really need to handle with a grain of salt. Granted, Temwa Chawinga showed up and almost immediately you realized A, the speed was greater than you thought it was going to be, and B, she's like really good at constantly finding space. She's as good at finding space as any attacker in the league is. She really anticipates breaking well. And despite the fact she's actually missed a fair number of big chances, she's right on like a 1-to-1 ratio between her XG and her goals. So not only does she have 5 goals, but she's like really sustainably at 5 goals. I'm not saying I think she's going to be a goal a game person, but I think that she's definitely a double-digit scorer in this league. And she's someone who has proved now with a fair number of other teams scouting and having tape on her to be a pretty tough person to shut down. So yeah, Temwa Chawinga, what an incredible light. I almost picked Vanessa DiBernardo because it was hard to conceive of her playing just a different midfield position. But Kansas City's just sort of been full of delights. When I went back and listened to our Kansas City preview, again, it was just like Kansas City needed all these things to fall in line. It's not that we didn't think they had a high upside. It was just high upside required like a domino rally. And Temwa Chawinga was a piece that we had undersold and underconsidered for being a big part of those dominoes clicking, and kind of all of them have. So Temwa Chawinga is the tip of the spear in what is working for Kansas City, for me. And the numbers, to me, suggest a player who will continue being very productive in this league.
Yeah, and I think like again, part of it is like the background that these players come from. Like one thing that we've heard recently is like why were teams or why were you unsure about Chewinga or Banda coming from China, but more sure about Oshwala and Kundananji. And like a big part of it is like you can go watch every single Oshwala minute and every single Kundananji minute, and you can go have advanced stats for basically every game they've played for the past 3 seasons. Like you can go see all of this. And you have maybe some of the Chinese league games end up on Wisecout. I don't think all of them do, but some of them do. And you don't have good quality data other than the Wisecout data, which is not good quality. So it's very difficult to have reasonably stats informed opinions about these players moving from leagues that there are fewer transitions from. Like, as far as I know, do we have a player who has moved from the Chinese league to NWSL before other than these two?
I want to say yes. I just can't think of who.
So it's at least it's a less frequently traveled path from what we know.
Without a doubt.
Where we've seen the transition from La Liga Femme to NWSL is actually quite fruitful. So I think that's like a huge part of why she's been so surprising to me is like Banda, the error bars on what she could be were huge.
Yeah, and the same thing goes for Bia. Like, I think Kansas City just wins. It's a testament to the scouting that they did because they made things that looked like mistakes to us in the offseason and that I think, frankly, have been non-factors or actually mistakes, and they were still able to absorb. Like, they didn't solve the AD Franch situation, and, like, that continues to actually be a problem. And their answer for that is to just bring in 2 absolute home runs up front. And then to reimagine a 31-year-old midfielder as one of the best progressive attacking midfielders in the league. Incredible.
The Bia one is fun because the stats did not. Our interpretation of the stats did not like that move. She was scored at like a middling to good rate, didn't do a ton else, and there were a lot of penalties in that data set. Like, I think, especially in the women's soccer world where like the quality of leagues varies drastically, and the parity of most of those leagues varies drastically. So it's very difficult to assess like how good is this player from a league that has won like how good is this player from Chelsea moving to the NWSL when there are only like 3 half decent teams in the FAWSL. So it makes projecting transfers really fun. But it also makes it really hard.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and to speak to the Bia question, like Corinthians and Palmeiras run that league, but the quality of Corinthians and Palmeiras do not match even, say, Liga MX Feminil or the Damallsvenskan in Sweden. So their massive disparity and you're the best player being, on the best team still doesn't really give you the necessary information to understand how they can fit in, again, the most competitive league in the world.
I think Liga MX is like the perfect example of this because I'll get to give you an example. I think the last season she played there, Mia Fischel was the top scorer. Christina Birkenrode was second.
Right.
Christina Birkenrode just got cut from multiple NWSL teams. Like she's just, at this point in her career, based on the evidence we have, not good enough to play in NWSL as a regular contributor. And then Mia Fischel goes for a huge transfer fee to Chelsea and has been fairly good before she got injured, has a decent goal scoring record for the US. Like, and those 2 players have the same goal total in the same league, playing for reasonably equivalent quality teams in a league that has huge disparity.
Yeah, and like Liga MX Feminil is a top 10 league in the world. That's the other thing. Like, even with that massive gap between talent levels there and, say, the WSL or NWSL, it's still one of the best. Like, how do you scout a player, as you say, from China, from Belgium, from Finland? It's a very tough task, and the scouts who can do it well do separate themselves. And it seems like Vlatko Andonovski and Camille Ashton's staff really, they're doing their job incredibly well.
And this is the other thing that can happen, or they just hit 2 home runs and will strike out a fair number of other times. But with these two, I think we can say 9 games into this season, with the current laying the 2x4 to the face of every other team in this league, they got those 2 right. And not only did they get them right as individuals, they got them right as people who could play together.
Well, because they had.
Yeah, no, yeah, but like, I mean, and that ain't nothing.
Yeah,
like,
sure.
In retrospect, would I go back and, like, have changed my view on Kansas City? I mean, maybe only mildly. It was actually a thing you needed to see come together, and Temwa Chawinga was a thing you needed to see just like constantly in behind, creating chances, not even being great at quote unquote like finishing big chances for whatever value you place in that. It's just like high volume matters. If you can just get that volume, that's where the value is. And she's so good at that.
The one team that we have not touched on at all across these 2 episodes is the Washington Spirit, which, they are, they're currently sitting 4th in the non-penalty XG differential per game model from ASA, and only just, like, they and Portland are more or less tied there and are putting up 2 points a game. That puts them 3rd in the table. Croy Bethune, Rookie of the Year candidate, Rookie of the Year favorite, frankly. Trinity Rodman is probably having the best season of her career right now. Adrian Gonzalez is building a tactical system that seems to actually be working for the players and will allow for the transition to Jonathan Giraldes to be pretty smooth come June. But Kieran, your biggest surprise comes from this lineup, not a player that I've mentioned yet. Who is that?
Oulimata Sarr. And I think the most interesting thing about Oulimata Sarr is that we're not super surprised that she's good. This is a player who had like a very good track record in France, really, really solid underlying numbers, but as a winger.
That's how Mark Parsons played her when she came over to Washington
Absolutely.
last year too.
And was like not amazing, but was okay. This year she's played almost exclusively as like an 8-10 in the middle of the pitch, driving things centrally. It's had some odd ripple effects to their team overall, but she's been extremely effective from an expected goals and expected assists point of view. She's been very progressive as a dribbler in the middle of the park. It's one of those things that you see this sometimes where like the like wide midfielder who's not that quick anymore gets turned into a center midfielder, which is not really her, but it's the same skill set coming inside where she's very much able to drive things centrally, where Spirit are able to find the midfielder on the weak side and it's just like zoom zoom, or they find a midfielder who's able to face forward in transition and it's zoom zoom. And with the ability that Rodman has to give other people space with her pace, it has really, really allowed Sarr to thrive.
Yeah.
I nailed it. I nailed it.
I mean, like, you got it. No, I mean, like, it's funny because Evan and I talked about the sort of Oulimata Sarr Ashley Hatch trade-off, because Ashley Hatch has sort of gone to one of the least productive players in the league. And you look at the Spirit team and they're just playing out of position. It's kind of like, would you take last year's Ashley Hatch profile or would you prefer this year's Oulimata Sarr? And I think watching Washington, I probably, despite as good as Ashley Hatch was last season, I think I'd probably take this iteration of Oulimata Sarr leading the line, just because the team looks way more dynamic.
I am inclined to agree. We've talked about it before. Washington has just sort of trapped themselves by signing Hatch to a long-term extension on pretty big money, and now found a player for her position that it seems like Gonzalez and Giraldes prefer. and Mark Krikorian. So what do you do about that? It's, sticker essentially at like left-sided midfield is what she has become. She's nominally a left winger, but she's not, your tricky dribbler who's driving end line a lot. She's, playing much deeper on the field and is just kind of being wasted. But Sarr in tandem with Rodman and Bethune have been terrors. There's no other way to describe it. I mean, they're fifth by expected goals per game, but it's a very tight distribution after you get past Kansas City. So they are absolutely in the mix for being one of the stronger attacks in the league. And Ashley Hatch only does one thing, and Sarr does more than one thing. That's just sort of what it comes down to.
I think one of the really fun things about Sarr playing centrally compared to Hatch is that it feels like she has dovetailed better with Bethune than Hatch ever could have. Like, Hatch is a very talented player, but like Sarr and Bethune have been able to like swap spots all the time where like one is the 9, one is the 10, and then you add in what Rodman's able to do off the right, and it's like it feels like Hatch maybe should have blended in a little bit better than she has as like an early 2010s like 4-2-3-1 where like the whole front four are just like floating and drifting around. But really it's only been Bethune and Sarr who end up doing that the most. But it's really benefited both her and Bethune, where like Bethune can, when they defend, like you end up with two transition monsters high sometimes, and when you win it, you always have a reasonably stable option to feet who can spin defenders and go, but you also have a whole ton of depth pressure from those players. So it's a really, really fun mold, and it's a really difficult mold to defend because there's just so much pressure on your center backs all the time of like, okay, well, can I follow this player to feet? Because am I going to get killed in behind? Yeah. Or if I lean off, like this player is going to turn and dribble straight at me and cook me. So it's a really, really difficult problem. And it's actually, this is like maybe a bit of a reach, but like it's not that different than what Barcelona have historically gotten from Aitana and Alexia, kind of like arriving from midfield, where like a lot of times the 9 will drift and the 10 or the 8 will fill in spaces there. And Bethune is a very different kind of player than those two, but it's been like I can kind of see the shape that it's taking.
Yeah, it's a very similar structure. Yeah, that level of fluidity and that level of interchange, when you are able to do it and do it well, it's a really winning formula. And yeah, whether you want to use Bethune as the runner and have Sarr hold up, or reverse, or have them play, start pinging the ball back and forth between them. They both can shoot in the box. You can't take any play off when you're a defender against them. All you had to do with Ashley Hatch was to just make sure she didn't receive in behind, and you were pretty much going to be okay, regardless, with the parentheses of you always have to deal with Rodman. But when it's now 2 extra things you have to think about rather than just one, yeah, that's tough.
I think the only thing that gives me a little bit of pause with Oulimata Sarr is like she's not generating a ton of shots per 90. She's like sub 3. She's not sub 3 by a ton, but like it's like one thing that I'm like holding on to as just a thought, like, are the requisite number of shots being created? But like it's a small thing to note as opposed to like a flaw. And because I think she's offering so many other things, I'm not actually that concerned by it. You were mentioning the Barcelona thing. This actually kind of reminds me, and maybe this is way off and I'll just kill this in the edit, but like this kind of reminds me, Ashley Hatch has kind of ended up like Zlatan when he was at Barca. It's just like, oh, this is a good player who does a very specific thing, who sort of requires the team to play into her, and if you choose not to do that because you think it is not your best way of playing, there is no space for you.
You've just made me really, really hope for the Ashley Hatch memoir where she puts Adrian Gonzalez on absolute blast.
And it's just called Ashley.
Yeah, just I am Ashley.
I am Ashley. Yeah, no, I mean, but like I think Ashley Hatch could be a really productive player for some other team. I think the question is just like, can Washington get great value given the contract? But as far as right now is concerned, I just don't know if there's like a great road back for her at Washington.
I don't think there is. And Ashley Hatch, who is a Mormon and from the great state of Utah, that just so happens to have a team with a lot of cap space available to them and really, really, really needs a number 9. Are they going to be willing to pay that money? Probably not. But
before we move on, I just want to preemptively claim an own goal. I said 8-10, but I meant 9-10 when I was talking about Sarr. I don't know why I said that. Sorry.
You're all good.
My biggest surprise, I'm actually going to go with 2 players, both rookies, both players who one had maybe more expected upside. The other has just been kind of come completely out of nowhere. And that's Raylan Turner and Emma Sears at Racing Louisville. Louisville, we knew were going to be good. Before Kirsten Wright got hurt, you assume that an attacking core of Wright, Savannah DeMello, and Uchenna Kanu could create chances and score goals. And Kanu has been good. Obviously, Wright's been hurt. Kanu's actually been quite good. But it's Turner and Sears that are really, really turning my head. I mean, Turner was a top 10 pick in the draft, so there is some expectation there, but I think that she's been much, much better than I thought she would be, and is also getting a ton more minutes than I thought she would. I mean, if you average out, a bunch of different XG models, she's posting half an XG per 96 minutes right now as a 22-year-old, 23-year-old. That's extraordinarily impressive, and her speed and her off-ball runs are the reason that Louisville can do the things that they have done, which is just create really, really good chances, albeit not very many of them, always making their chances count. And then Sears has been, we talk about Chewinga speed, we talk about Banda speed. Like Emma Sears has insane speed when she is both with the ball and without the ball. I think during a broadcast of a Louisville game recently, she was clocked, her top speed in the middle of a sprint was clocked at like 21, 22 miles an hour, something like that.
Oh my God.
Yeah, absurd shit. And just for everybody's reference, like the fastest Usain Bolt ever run was a 20-meter window in 2009 where he ran like 28 miles an hour. And that was when he broke the world record for the 100-meter dash, just to give you some frame of reference here. Sears has been, the best, just on pure pace, just the best runner in behind, and has been the best substitute. I mean, truly the best super sub in the league. Like, there's pretty much nobody you count off the bench at minute 60 more than Sears so far. So much so that Bev Yanez is beginning to put her in the starting 11, and that doesn't seem like it's working. She has not generated as many chances. It feels like her particular blend of athleticism is most effective in short bursts, and it's not necessarily one for, the endurance of a 90-plus minute match. So that's something to keep an eye on. But the two of them in tandem have allowed for Louisville's attack to really fly. It's been Sears especially, just because I did not see her coming, has just been a real delight to me.
My only real comment on the two of them is that every year I do I've done it for the Challenge Cup, but now I'll have to do it for this tournament with Liga MX, where because teams rotate so heavily, I try and find which young players might get a chance to pop in this tournament and then impact the second half of the season based on this. And I normally restrict myself to players who play less than 1,000 minutes, so it's not like, oh, Sophia Smith is going to pop or whatever. They're both just going to be too good to be on that list. They're both going to play too much and have had too much impact and be too, not a known quantity because they're in their early 20s, but they are the early train is leaving the station.
They're becoming known knowns as opposed to,
yes,
anything else. They, I mean, both Emma Sears is at what? 0.55 non-penalty expected goals plus assists per 90. Raylan Turner's at 0.72.
Yeah.
That's a pretty good output for people their age who kind of only get better at that point in their careers. It's really bright. I'm glad you added Ryland Turner here because I think Emma Sears and Ryland Turner sort of come as a package, and again speak to like I think some really good work that Louisville's been doing in terms of recruitment of talent. Before the season, we didn't know how the talent would all fit together. Now that we're seeing it, I think it's really impressive. I would love to see them turn those into wins. I think that is a fine criticism to lob out there, but they'd be a candidate for unlucky just kind of in a different way. That said, you will always take a team that has talent and with the problem of figuring out how to deploy it over a team that lacks talent. And Louisville is sort of showing why it's great to have as much talent as possible, even if you can't get them all on at all times.
Yeah, I mean, my one criticism right now for Beviana is that Alexa Barr is getting more minutes than Turner is. Like Turner dropped out of the starting 11 a month ago in favor of Barr, or maybe perhaps in favor of Sears because Barr was also getting was carrying a pretty high volume of minutes earlier in the year. But Barr has been fine, but I would like to see how Turner and Sears play off of each other a little bit more consistently. Because if Kanu and Sears are your wingers and Turner is your battering ram in the middle, that's a cool sounding front three, if you ask me. That's a front three that can do a lot of different things. And when DeMello is back up and running in 90 minutes match fit again, the combination of service that you get from Taylor Flint and the combination of service you get from DeMello mixed in with the diversity of what that front three can do, that's cool. I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, Kanu, Sears, Turner, overdrive. Yeah, there's your... I'm so sorry. Let's move.
With regard to Louisville's second half of the season, you ain't seen nothing yet.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah. Wow.
Oh,
all right.
Now the sad.
Yeah, we got to pivot. We got to pivot to some of our biggest disappointments. And I like this list because it covers basically all the areas where you could pull a player from, whether it was a big free agent signing that has not popped yet, or it was a big international transfer that we thought was going to be a lot better than they have been, or a very high pick rookie who has completely flatlined. So I like the diversity here. I'm sorry that this conversation is going to be a little bit of a bummer, but let's start with you, Eric. Who's your biggest disappointment?
I hinted at it in part one. It's Savannah McCaskill, who I think has done a couple of things to really hinder San Diego's progress as a team, and particularly in the attack. First off, she's got a G+ of negative 0.82. That, whatever, we're still early. She's got a negative G+ in all the categories that G+ tracks. She's got a negative number there. And that makes her really unique in the NWSL. Normally, you have somebody who's at least the passing or the dribbling is going well. She is below average in every category. She's negative 0.31 in passing. That's really bad. We were talking about Ali Sentner and her shot selection. That was harsh. Savannah McCaskill, if we're going by that standard, Savannah McCaskill has the worst expected goals value per shot for players with 10 or more shots this season at 0.05. That's really bad. She only has registered, I believe, a single shot on target. Also really bad. She's shooting them from an average distance of almost 22 yards. That's really troubling. And these are all sort of like career lows. Moreover, her 0.23 non-penalty expected goals plus assists per 90 is second career worst for her. And this is basically half the production she was creating at Angel City. You could assess some of that to being bedded in. You could assess some of that to Angel City just being a little more attacking than San Diego has been historically. But I actually think the problem is she's a player who requires the ball at her feet a lot. And she's in requiring those things, she's actually diminishing and taking away from every other San Diego attacker. And in particular, she's filling a role that Jaden Shaw should have. Now, Jaden Shaw is going to be out for a little while, so this problem is going to persist. But Savannah McCaskill has sort of been everything you don't want out of a free agent signing. A ball-intensive, inefficient, bad shooting cog in a machine that wasn't moving particularly well, regardless.
It's unfortunate because I think, at least for me, I really liked the McCaskill signing. I thought it was actually very shrewd. And I think what I expected was that the things McCaskill does really well are all around the box. Like, she's a midfielder who gets a ton of shots. She fills that 9 space a lot. For where Wave are, they have Jaden Shaw gets the ball into the final third into the box. Alex Morgan's best skills at this part of her career are have skewed more towards passing than they have in her past. I thought this was a very natural fit. And it has not happened that way. Her passing numbers are significantly down from last season at Angel City and were much more like her first season at Angel City, which was not super impressive. The shot numbers are down. The quality of her shots, as you mentioned, are down. For example, the average shot is worth about 0.1 XG. Having an XG per shot of 0.05 is horrific. That would make Ali Sentner blush. So, again, I think some of it is we've talked about the difficulties already in the first episode that the Wave are having in terms of establishing their attacks without their first choice center back pairing and how that goes as the season goes. And McCaskill has been historically kind of a slow starter for seasons. If you look back at last season, something like 70% of her XG and XA happens in the second half of the season, which is not a huge skew, but it's enough of a skew that, okay, maybe there's something there. So I wouldn't write her off yet, but I think it's very fair to say that she has been quite disappointing so far.
Yeah, it's not writing her off. It's just this: you've committed a fair amount of money to this person being thing that pushes you over the.
Anyways,
we think, yes, of course, but you've committed. She's sort of your marquee free agent signing, and this is supposed to be the element that takes you from a team that was sniffing, that won a Shield, and that was sniffing making its own home final, and they've become a team that we're looking at and we're probably still a playoff team, probably will sort it out, but that's a lot on track record and a lot less about the performances we've seen so far. And your big signings just kind of shouldn't be net negatives and shouldn't be hurting. And that doesn't mean she won't figure it out. It's just right now, Savannah McCaskill so far has been not helpful for San Diego's vision of progression.
Yeah, the one thing I will say, I don't disagree really with anything that has been proffered so far. But the one thing I will say, San Diego is posting 1.25 non-penalty XG per game by ASA's model. That's 7th. That's average. It's not great, but it's not a disaster. And McCaskill's expected assist numbers are they're above average. They're not elite. They're not, one or more standard deviation above league average, but they're above average. She is creating in her final ball a little bit of, a decent amount of value. Now, that doesn't solve any of the other positional redundancies, the expectations for shooting and self-chance creation that we've already laid out. And as you say, your marquee signing should not be bringing you down like this, or should not be. It shouldn't just be fine or pretty good. You want something a lot more, especially when you're the reigning Shield winner and you're expected to push on from that. So that is one thing I will at least offer, that that final ball is still pretty decent. It's just not nearly enough.
We really don't have time to talk about this in depth enough, but have any of the free agent signings really hit yet?
You mean inside the league free agent signings?
Yeah,
signing,
yes,
known entities.
Proper free agency signing.
I think Natalie Kuika has hit in Chicago. I think that was a really good signing. I think she's played pretty excellent center back there.
Like the list is less strong than you'd think. Not that it really means anything. It's just interesting.
Yeah.
No, that I began with a Chicago center back says actually a fair amount just right there. But I think Casey Kruger has been good. Yeah.
Swanson's having a good year.
That's a retention more than it is a.
Yeah.
Oh, so you're specifically talking about free agent signings who move teams.
Yeah. Like Dabinia got injured, so it's like kind of not fair. And like we're very new into the Gotham thing.
Yeah.
But none of them have been really like terrific yet.
Right.
I don't know, just like you see this in the NBA a lot, that like players go and they get a huge bag in free agency and it hinders their team's ability to
do other things,
do other stuff, because teams who are good don't have the cap space to sign whoever.
Right.
Like it is very unusual to have a Gotham who win the league and then have the cap.
And the free agents, the free agents over the last two off seasons who are likely on big money skew over 30, I think. McCaskill's 27, 28, but like Dabinia's over 30, Crystal Dunn's over 30, Emily Sonnet's over 30, Vanessa DiBernardo was over 30. Yeah, that's interesting. It's very Major League Baseball in like the early 2000s.
Yeah, it takes you that long to get the years of service.
Let's move on. Kieran, who's your disappointment?
I think Evan and I can kind of talk about ours in the same vein because they come from the same team.
Yeah.
My biggest disappointment was big international transfer Dana Castellanos, who I was admittedly not super high on to begin with. Now, there's two reasons for that. One, her time at FSU was like really before my WOSO following closely, so I just didn't really see it. And the second is that when she was at Atletico in Spain, the Spanish league was also fairly inaccessible to us in the West at the time. And at Man City, she was like played 9 different roles for Gareth Taylor, none of them particularly well,
and didn't play
never
very much.
really, never really settled in. Like sometimes as a 6, sometimes as a winger, kind of all over the place. So I was fairly skeptical about paying this player lots of money and paying a big transfer fee for her. However, even with that fairly skeptical approach, she has been very poor. And I don't think she's being put in amazing situations to succeed. I did my little rant about the coaching going on at Bay in the last episode, so I won't talk about it too much, but I think she has been very disappointing. There's very little creative passing happening. She's not getting a lot of shots. She's had basically one very good game where she played as a false 9 thing versus Portland. But other than that, I have been very, very disappointed.
Yeah, I think this is the most scandalous international transfer of the last offseason, I think. Because it's not just that she had a pretty high profile and is not necessarily living up to it, but also that like if Albertine Montoya's system was going to work, it needed a player like the player we thought Dana Castellanos could be. And if she is not that player, then we kind of have seen the results of the way that Bay has folded like a cheap card table, especially out of possession. That has been the biggest disappointing. Yeah,
because I think you can wave away the attacking stuff and say she's not being put in positions to succeed because she's not a deeper midfielder. She's a 10 or plays in the attacking band, and like she is being asked to do deeper progression stuff much more than is probably ideal. The defensive side of things has been frankly abhorrent. Like they have conceded multiple late goals where it's like her standing 40 yards from her net while her player runs into the box to score, or nominally the player opposite her. Okay, teams don't play Bielsa man marking all over the pitch, but nominally her counterpart is running into the box to score while she stood hands on hips 35 yards from goal. And it is one of those things that if you were not a huge earner with a big transfer fee, you would be benched.
Yeah. Possession adjusted interceptions and tackles per 90 as calculated over at the McClock app, which gathers FBref data and slaps percentiles on it and makes radars out of them. It's an awesome service. Check it out. Based on the way that I'm reading this, she might not even be 10th percentile for midfielders.
No, she's not. She's like 7th percentile.
Yeah.
for defensive activity, which is unbelievable for a team who is getting like transition. It's a track meet every time they lose the ball.
And on the other side, she's turning the ball over 12 times a game, which is disastrous for a midfielder. Like there's just no positive way really to spin the season that she's been having.
I got to the spreadsheet last, and I saw that Dana Castellanos and Savvy King had been taken. I'm helping transition you, Evan. And I was like, oh, those are both good picks.
Yeah.
And but you know, I think so much of what we're talking about here is just the distance between expectation and reality. And there are other players having bad seasons or poor seasons or below what we expect. It's that Dana Castellanos came in with such high expectation of what could be delivered, and what she is delivering is actually pretty uniquely poor. That's not to say it has to be that way forever. Again, I think we hinted at it we didn't hint at it, we hit it with like a hammer. There is an Albertine Montoya-sized potential change that could change the prospects of all of these Bay players. There is probably a way to win with Bay, as is currently constituted. Right now, Dana Castellanos in that system is not playable.
Well, unless she doesn't play in midfield.
Unless we get the Portland performance.
So this is the thing. If you look at her numbers for the whole season, and it's a kind of dumb way to think about this, but it makes sense. She grades out over the whole season as something like an 80th percentile attacking contributor in terms of passes into the box, shots created, all that sort of stuff. And you're like, wow, she must be doing a good job. However, it is literally all the Portland game and nothing else. She has like 70% of her XG comes from just the Portland game. A huge chunk of her XA, a huge chunk of her passes into the box, a huge chunk of her key passes. Everything comes from the Portland game, where she does so much good stuff in that game, where she plays as a false nine for the whole game. And every other game in midfield is like, I pass the ball into the final third one time. I pass the ball into the box one time. I take one shot from 35 yards.
Very good players can look very poor if put in poor positions to succeed based on what they do. And then suddenly when put in positions to succeed where they flourish, you're like, oh, right, that is who that player is. And often enough, management doesn't bring together the right set of players to work together harmoniously, or coaches misuse players by putting them in positions that don't allow them to succeed. And I think what we have at Bay is a lot of the latter. I don't think any of us think that Dana Castellanos isn't potentially a very good player in the right setup, or Savvy King, as Evan is about to illuminate, are not necessarily good players. It's just right now they're in a choppy ocean without a life preserver, and that is a great way to like drill a player's confidence into nothingness.
Yeah, and confidence is a thing that I think Savvy King is desperately in need of, because this player was the number 2 overall pick, a freshman out of the University of North Carolina, good pedigree, had a great year last year as a center back, and has been asked to play fullback, which she has some history at the youth level of playing, but it's no joke, man. Like negative 0.13 goals added above average per 96. That is bottom of the table for all fullbacks in the NWSL. That's how bad she has been. And it's not as though she's been a very good progressor of the ball, but this is all coming from her lack of any kind of defensive capability. And it could be that that's driven mostly by how Montoya wants his fullbacks to play. He wants to keep them high up. He wants to keep them available to turn the ball around and keep it progressing through the thirds quickly and be the wide option on either flank. And the moment anybody can get in behind, everybody, the fullbacks are on an island and they can't recover. And King, being so young, she's 19. She doesn't have the wherewithal yet at the senior level, at this level, to be able to know when she needs to hold her position, cover territory, read how defenders are operating so that she doesn't constantly get caught too high. It's really, really frustrating because a number 2 overall pick, even at the age of 19, should have the type of potential that does not look like this. And it does not feel like she's being well served by Montoya.
Yeah, this is definitely a player who I think is not being put in a position to succeed. Like, I think, yes, she played center back last year, mostly in a back 3. So it's, again, not quite the same as like only playing back 4 center back or only playing fullback. Like there's somewhat more crossover. But I think when you look at how they've set up, it's Dana as the 8 on her side, and it's been Camberos or Kundananji as the winger on that side. And for the talents that both of those players have, they're not exactly the most diligent of defenders the other way. And what we have seen over and over and over again, and if you look at the Houston Dash game that they in their home opener that they lose 3-2, is just this bonkers game where she gets 2v1 the whole second half, and there's no help and nobody's coming, and it's like winger and fullback and winger and fullback, and she's actually done a decent job as a 1v1 defender. Like her like 1v1 win rate, as much stock in that as you want to take, is quite high. But she is just getting drilled in 2v1s all the time. I haven't looked, actually, Evan, I know you might have looked at this, at Mike and Brigio's like net G plus and the G minus stuff.
Yeah.
But I bet you her G minus is horrific.
Can tell you right now. So her G minus in open play per game, and this is not including the most recent weekend of games, negative 0.03.
Yeah, so it's
not a disaster.
That's better than I expected, which says something.
It's all in her on-ball defensive actions that this is happening. You know, where she might go in for a tackle, lose it, and then all of a sudden there's an ocean of space behind her.
Well, she's had a few of those like G plus killers as well, where you like botch a clearance in the box and it falls to somebody,
right? And
they get like a huge recovery value in the box.
Yeah,
this is a very unfair comparison because rookie defenders are never this good. But like, imagine you got Naomi Girma with this pick instead, and like imagine how transformative that could be for an expansion team.
How transformative it was for an expansion team.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. As we wrap up, I'm going to throw a quick one to everyone. Because we love making future own goals just as much as we love assessing our past own goals. Who's winning the league, guys, right now?
Shield or the tournament?
Give me both.
I think Orlando wins the Shield.
Okay.
I think their defense allows them to weather some results when their offense isn't necessarily clicking better than Kansas City's can.
Kieran?
I'm going to go KC Shield, and I'm going to go Spirit Cup.
Eric?
Oh, I can give mine if you're still thinking about who you want.
Yeah, I'm still thinking.
I think it's probably Orlando Shield. I'm with you. For the cup itself, which is so much more open, I'm going to stick to my guns on this. I feel like Gotham will figure their way through it. I feel like Gotham. I just feel like it's too early to abandon that feeling. Like, we've not seen it work yet, and Gotham's still like treading water quite nicely. It's just like player by player. If everyone gets healthy, that's a really tough team to beat.
I'm going to be boring. I actually think Orlando is going to win the cup too, because they're built for knockout football. You know,
totally.
So I think that they're built to weather the long drudgery of the season, and I think that when they have to win 2 or 3 games, 2 of which or 1 of which or 2 of which honestly could be at home, I think they got it. All right. If you think we have an own goal,
and we do,
you know where to find us. Email us at expectedowngoals@gmail.com. The letter expectedowngoals@gmail.com. You don't need to be back channeling this kind of stuff.
Also,
you can say it to our face. We can take it.
Also, please feel free to email mailbag questions if you want us to answer for mistakes we've made.
We'd love to.
Yeah, we would love to do that. So if you have any questions or feel like your team is being not considered, please email that account.
If we've besmirched any team's honor, we will have pistols at dawn.
Hell, even make it public. Call us out in the town square on Twitter or Blue Sky, and just, tweet us something that you're feeling deep in your heart, because we will meet you.
Yeah.
And we might get shot. We might get shot and killed, but we will meet you.
That's X Own Goals, the letter X Own Goals on all social channels. And of course, please rate us, review us, follow us wherever you get podcasts. Tell all your friends about us. Rate us 5 stars if you're going to rate us at all. I know one of you didn't do that,
which is fine,
but that's okay. And we will be back next week to wrap up the WSL season, which is coming down to the final day between Chelsea and Manchester City. So that's going to be a very exciting thing to discuss. So until then, thanks for dropping in, Kieran.
My pleasure.
Yep. Toodaloo.